Welcome to another episode of the Horse Advocate Podcast. This is Doc T, and today we're going to read chapter 6 and 7 from my autobiography, Since the Days of the Romans, My Journey of Discovering a Life with Horses. I hope you're enjoying these. Here we go. Let's just get right into it. Chapter 6, Dyslexia. Now firmly placed on the career path, with a future of becoming the farm manager of Tanracken Farm, I started to reflect on my life. I wondered why I was so poor at school. I didn't feel stupid, and I often felt I was a lot smarter than most of my former classmates. I could learn things easily, but the grades weren't there to prove it. Add to this my unsuccessful attempts at college, and doubt crept into my thoughts. The responsibility of a farm manager required not only hard work, but also clear thought. I wondered if I would be successful in my newly found career, or if my lack of ability in school would catch up with me. I loved horses, but details never lingered long in my mind. Lineages of horses were impossible to recreate correctly, thus putting me at a disadvantage in the breeding aspect of the industry. On the flip side, I became very successful when working with all the horses. As if I could read their minds, I connected with all the mares that would come into the farm for breeding or foaling. I couldn't focus much on my inadequacies, though, because we were in the middle of a foaling season, and there was not much time to think. When I did unexpectedly get a moment off one afternoon, I decided to visit my parents, who were living 20 minutes away. Dad was still at work in Manhattan, so Mom and I took advantage of the brilliant spring day to sit in lawn chairs outside the house. This rite to spring is often done on days when the temperature gets above 50 degrees. We were wearing coats to stay warm as we sat eating a tomato and lettuce sandwich with garlic salt and mayonnaise in our attempt to fool ourselves into thinking it was summer. With our late lunch gone, we sat quietly enjoying the above freezing temperatures. My mind swirled, as it has always done since childhood. A random thought came up and stayed. The thought was about me going to the vocational school while I was still in high school to take remedial reading courses. This was along with the special classes I was placed in after the regular school classes and in summer school. I was given a story to read, followed by a series of questions to test our comprehension of the story. The instructor then taught me to read by forcing me to place my finger under the first word of the first sentence. He then instructed me to draw my finger under the line, moving it from left to right. My eyes were to follow reading the words one at a time until I reached the end of the line. At this point, my finger was to move to the next line down, taking my eyes with it, so I would begin to read the next line. I was to repeat this process until all the lines were read. My eyes would do as they were told for at most 2 lines, after which they went wherever they wanted to go. Usually, they went to the opposite side of the page of where my finger went. The eyes would move from right to left, crossing the path the finger was making as it went from left to right. As I progressed, I would be moved up a scale of difficulty that was identified by the color of the books. I never made it past the halfway point, and I became discouraged. It was this feeling that had risen above my swirling thoughts that afternoon with Mom. I decided to ask her about it. Mom, what were all those tests I took when I was in high school? What tests? She asks. You remember, after school and at the vocational school where they made me read all those stupid little books? What she said next stunned me. Oh, those tests. Well, they said something like you had difficulty reading. I think they said you read from right to left instead of left to right. For the first time in my life, someone told me why I couldn't read. After a poor high school record and 3 attempts at college, now I knew. Mom, that's called dyslexia. Really, she said as she took a sip of iced tea. What's dyslexia? I said in disbelief, it's when someone reads backwards. The educators never thought it was important to explain to my parents or me what they had discovered about me. Maybe it was because they knew little about this newly discovered syndrome. Maybe it was because not telling us was the way educators were taught to treat non-conforming students. I will never know why they never told us, but my distrust of the education system started that day. Another thing that started that very moment was my determination to learn how to read. There's an expression that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. My teacher appeared on TV with an advertisement for the Evelyn Wood speed reading course with a free introductory seminar at the Mount Kisco Holiday Inn the following week. I went and was amazed at what was presented. I signed up and bought the training books, but I never went to any of the classes. I just read their material and began to understand how my brain worked. The best way to explain how I read is to imagine an empty room inside my head. As I read the words on the page, the words enter into the empty room and swirl around in a blur. In a moment, they settle down onto the floor of the room. They can be upside down or on the end, as well as right side up. Now, I take the words and arrange them into a structure using the rules for sentence syntax. In a moment, the words start to come into focus and the meaning of the sentence becomes evident. The sentence is now allowed to leave the room and more words are then allowed to enter. The process repeats itself until what I'm reading is finished. This is a very slow process. In the past, everyone was telling me how to read fast. I skipped over words and sentences in an effort to keep up. If I slowed down and did the process my way, I was left behind. I can't remember what it was about the Evelyn Wood speed reading process that clicked with me. Between the course and just knowing that I read differently, not incorrectly, gave my self-confidence the boost it needed for me to advance. I felt strong. I started to experiment on reading techniques that worked for me. I found a book in my dad's library called Sun Up by Will James, a story about a cowboy's life 100 years ago. I became enraptured with his stories. From his experience with horses, I became a better horseman as well as a better reader. Over the next year, I worked on the process of changing everything I had been taught about reading. I discovered the slowest part was putting the puzzle together. I started with license plates. As I drove, I would look at the plate on the car in front of me and allow the numbers and letters to float into my room. I used my eyes like the shutter on a camera. I briefly closed my eyes, then rapidly opened and closed them like a camera shutter taking in the plate numbers. Yes, I know I was driving at the time, and maybe this wasn't the safest thing to do, but the process didn't take long. It was short, but each step had to occur in order for me to, quote, see the plate. As I saw the letters and numbers swirl into my room, I quickly learned to arrange what I saw. When done, I would open my eyes and compare my answer to the plate in front of me. Once I learned to trust the process, my accuracy rose. Once my accuracy neared 100%, I graduated myself from license plates to whole exit signs. The secret was to take in the whole text as an image rather than word by word. As I increased my confidence, I started to read more books and magazines. Over the next 18 months, I gradually improved to where I thought I could try school again. I also realized that I was not stupid or slow. I just think differently, and my conviction was correct and fully justified. I also realized that this might have been a blessing. It is because of this dyslexia that I ended up in a career I never dreamed I would be in. Only a few more hurdles to clear before becoming a vet, but learning to read probably was the biggest. Story time. Tom and Rockets, the saga. Doc, this is Tom. Can you come quick? Rocket's in trouble. Usually this is where the story begins, but this is more than a story. It's a saga. Tom's quarter horse, Rockets, had been a patient of mine for years. He is what a vet would call a routine horse. No emergencies ever occurred, and the usual visit was for preventive things. Minor scrapes or a worried eye, were usually addressed simply and with one visit. In trouble were words I'd never heard from Tom. In fact, the trouble had been mostly with Tom as he and his wife went through difficult times. They were now divorced. Solace was found in preparing Rockets for this day. It had been a dream of Tom's to ride his horse from upstate New York down to Texas, into Mexico, and through Central America, into South America, along the Pan American Highway. After the divorce, he scheduled his early retirement from his job at Cornell and began to sell off everything he owned. Today, all he had was on his and Rocket's back. The day was wet. A spring rain soaked the leaves and created a double rain where you could be hit with a soft raindrop or a heavier one of accumulated drops on a leaf. This, of course, caused a drenched feeling where no part of land remained dry. It was this day that Tom had scheduled to leave for the southern hemisphere. I would have slept in and waited for drier weather, but Tom was excited. Nothing was going to stop him. As he rode Rockets down the hill toward the main road, I'm sure the boy inside of him was leaping around, but he was the type that showed little emotion on the outside. Down the road, the lazy, unemotional pair drew closer to the first of many forks in the road. The excitement he was trying to suppress leaked into Rocket's body. Ahead on the main road, before the first turn south, was a construction crew laying a long and large pale green pipe. Rocket's eyes grew large. Nothing in his training with Tom had prepared him for this. Nervously, he placed his hooves in directions that Tom had not planned. Tom stopped and calmed his horse, aware he was losing his connection. He then dismounted, and once he felt he had Rocket's attention, he assured him it would be okay, and if he would just follow the leader, they could both walk past his big, mean yellow monsters with a long green snake. Nope, said Rockets as he refused to follow. Tom, looking for an alternative, saw it in a railroad track running parallel to the road. Acting on his impromptu plan, he led Rockets back to the railroad grade and turned north where he could detour around the construction. All was going well, but in about 100 feet at eye level, an invisible bridge appeared. It spanned about 40 feet and was made of railroad ties that were about 12 inches wide and spaced about 10 inches apart. Only 40 ties across. No big deal. Rockets would surely follow, Tom thought. He's my friend, and he trusts me. 10 feet across the bridge, Rocket's hoof slipped on the rain-soaked timber, and his left foreleg fell between the ties. His body thudded on the ties, and the animal started to panic. Tom, trying not to fall himself, calmed his horse, but deep inside he panicked too. He grabbed his phone and dialed me. This is when he said, "Doc, this is Tom. Can you come quick? Rocket's in trouble." Off in the distance, an approaching northbound train blew its whistle. I felt helpless as I heard Tom's words. I was an hour away with a lot of unpredictable traffic in between us. I advised him to get someone else to attend. His story of Rockets falling through a railroad bridge seemed beyond the scope of a veterinarian. However, I had learned early in my career that a veterinarian does not attend to the animal's needs, but they attend to the needs of the animal's owner through their animal. So I said, "Get some help now. I will be there as fast as I can." I called the New York State Troopers and asked for an escort. I was worried that the snarls of traffic between the interstate and the horse would add time I did not have. Tom had painted a grim picture, but not grim enough to encourage the police to help. I was on my own. Luckily, Tom was not. You could see Rockets and Tom from the main road. Attention grew and people gathered. Whenever people see something not fitting the pattern of normalcy, like seeing a person with 3 eyes, it forces them to come and stare. Usually the crowd becomes mesmerized into inaction, but on occasion, if the circumstances are right, the people will galvanize together and help. That is what this crowd did as the northbound coal train approached. One nameless man turned towards the sound and ran as fast as he could, waving his coat. The engineer said later that due to the warm weather, his cars loaded with coal for the heating plant were empty. He was heading north to the salt mines by the lake to pick up a load of salt. Had he been loaded, he never would have been able to stop in time. The running man had taken good action at the right time, and Rockets received a break. Another man, seeing the train had stopped, realized that this horse had to be extracted now. He also saw the pipeline construction crew along the main road and went to plead with the foreman. He did well because shortly there was a crane hovering above the horse. By now, the university vets had arrived to sedate Rockets and give painkiller. The crowd brought their hands and strength together and passed straps under Rockets. Soon he was high above the tracks and being swung to safety. To everyone's amazement, especially Tom's, Rockets slowly started to walk. He was bruised and cut in many areas. The vet offered to help, but Tom said, "No, thank you. My vet will be here any minute." He walked Rockets back to his barn and made him comfortable. I had missed all the action, but I was soon to work attending to the cuts and abrasions. It took 3 hours. During this time, as Tom replayed what had happened, I saw the shock he was going through. This is where the real work of a veterinarian starts. Suturing a gaping cut is easy. Mending an owner's mind filled with guilt, doubt, and fear is harder. Maybe I only needed an hour or so to actually care for the horse, but Tom needed the full 3 hours I spent there that day. As Rockets munched on hay, Tom made some coffee, then said, "Geoff, I think I won't go on this trip." I asked why. He recited his list of reasons formulated in his head that day. I said, "Tom, you have been no less traumatized by this than Rockets. You need time to heal. I will come back every day until I know both of you are doing better." I went on to say, "These minor wounds will be fine to move on in about 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to work things out. Don't let fear stop you from living your dream. You need to face fear and realize that it is only your perception, and right now you feel guilty for leading Rockets over the bridge. Get over it, because he already has." With that, we paused and looked at his horse lazily munching on a pile of hay. He was living in the moment. He did not show any signs of resentment. He looked content, and Tom gave a brief smile. It took 2 weeks for all the wounds to heal. It took a month for Tom's wounds to heal. On a quiet, late summer morning, they both left town, never to return. Tom never realized his dream of following the Pan American Highway across Central America into South America. At the Rio Grande Bridge between the U.S. and Mexico border, the authorities said he was not allowed to ride the horse across the bridge. He could trailer it, but this was not his dream. He made a fuss, and soon the Laredo newspaper caught wind of it. Tom sent me the front page with a large picture of him and Rockets above the fold that told their story. A groundswell of support for them started. A woman came forward and offered Tom and Rockets a place to stay until the crossing became resolved. The letter Tom wrote to me had me choking with tears of joy. The woman who offered him shelter became his soulmate, and they had decided to marry. I lost track of Tom and Rockets after that, but for all I know, Tom is happily married living in Texas. Remember this: for every dream you have, follow it no matter what obstacle gets in your path. Look at adversity as an opportunity. Never let fear be an excuse for not taking action. Chapter 7. Barn Girl. One of my new duties at Tanrakin Farm was learning to break yearlings for riding. Back then, the term breaking did not have a stigma attached to it as it does today. What we did was organized and tailored to each individual horse we trained. Most breakings were uneventful, and we never used force. It is exactly what the natural horsemen do today. We worked in teams, and I was teamed with Sonny. I became the ground man, introducing the young horse to the bit and the saddle and the pressure of the girth. It became my laboratory for discovering how to first listen to the horse and then to be understood. It is where I developed two-way communication with horses as a way to establish trust. Some horses were quicker than others, but we always took our time, proving patience was quicker than the quick beating and demand method. The first step in breaking horses at the farm always started right after birth. Every foal was haltered on day one and taught leadership. Leading the foal ahead of the mare rather than allowing it to follow, the mare easily teaches confidence. This one procedure alone, if done by every horse owner with a newborn foal, would reduce ill-mannered horses tremendously. When the foal entered the spring of their second year, every foal was not only tractable, they were usually willing to learn new things. Having the young horse now accept a halter with a chiffney bit attached was usually easy. They soon would have a bridle and bit comfortably in the mouth. Next, I would place the jockey's exercise saddle on the back. I called the small saddle a postage stamp. It weighed maybe 2 pounds without the girth. This was placed on the back, then off the back, then back again, until the 2-year-old understood the new idea. The most important part of training a horse is to know when to stop. Learning one little lesson may have taken only 5 minutes, but then it was time to stop, congratulate, and wait a day before teaching another lesson. Breaking down the process into many small steps is how I describe breaking a horse, but it is how a horse learns, through assurance and repetition. It is the same way humans learn when you get right down to it. The next step was to attach the saddle to the horse using a girth. Tightening the girth often sent a few youngsters into a tizzy, but it was short-lived and with little conviction on the part of the horse. We always broke the horse in a 12-foot by 12-foot stall with a 20-foot high ceiling. I stood in the center of the stall, and the horse had a halter on and a lead rope attached. I stuck the free end deep into my right front pocket. Now I still had access to control the horse only a short distance from my right hand, yet both of my hands were free to work with the horse. I placed the saddle on the horse and had him take a turn around the stall. Next, I attached the girth and snugged it up tight enough to keep the saddle in place, but not so tight to be uncomfortable. We would take another turn or two around the stall. I continued this process slowly over a few days, depending on the acceptance by the yearling. At some point, the girth became tight enough to carry the weight of a rider. This is where Sonny came into the picture. In the stall, I stood quietly in the center with a haltered horse in hand. Sonny stood quietly next to me. She was small as a jockey. She would hold onto the saddle using a left hand on the front of it and a right hand on the back of it. She would stand on her right leg while she bent her left leg back 90 degrees at the knee. With my left hand holding the halter, my right arm would be down at my side with my right hand cupped around Sonny's bent left lower leg just above her ankle. We counted to 3. I lifted her straight up and she would land as light as a feather with her stomach on the saddle. We called this bellying the horse. At the same time, I asked the horse to move forward to place the horse's energy in any direction other than straight up. Almost without exception, this was done without incident. Occasionally, the horse would hop a little, but this was kept under control and the student would easily settle down. The final step of my job was setting the rider on top of the horse with both legs on each side of the horse. The sequence was belly the horse, turn once in the stall, then off. Belly, turn once, then off. Then it was rider up, turn once, then off. I gave a pat on the neck, and it was on to the next horse. The day soon came when the horse had to be ridden in the stall without me. Sonny would teach the horse to move forward within the stall. She would turn the horse using the bit to go the other way in the stall. Finally, when the lessons were learned and the horse was ready, I would open the gate and Sonny would ride the horse out of the stall, turn left, and ride the horse for the first time down the shed row. Again, most horses did this well, but on occasion, some spirited horses would become a handful as they jumped up or went sideways as they experienced their freedom outside the stall, but now with a lump of human on their back. Sonny and I made a good team, and I learned a lot from her years of doing this. I was looking forward to repeating the process with the next batch of horses that needed breaking. This was scheduled for May. I heard that a new girl was starting over at the pony barn. I considered it part of my job to introduce myself to any new help. Usually, I would just come across a new employee as I did my job, but word got out quickly on the farm that she was good looking. I decided that I soon had business to do at the pony barn, knowing I'd run into her. She had just dipped 2 pails of water into the old-fashioned bathtub used as a stock tank filled with drinking water. She turned around to walk toward where I had just entered the pony yard. Carrying 2 full buckets of water is difficult enough without the curves of a woman's hips interfering. With each step she took, the buckets moved beyond their ability to contain the water. Her pant legs were wet with splashed water and her face beaded with sweat. Still, her clear green eyes sparkled. Long brown hair was parted in the middle and swept back to each side, tied into a ponytail that swayed as she walked. Her eyes met mine, and she smiled. Time stopped, for me at least. Hi, I'm Geoff, the assistant farm manager. I mostly work at the training barn, but I heard there was a new person over here, so I came over to introduce myself. At least that's what I had planned to say. I can't remember what actually came out of my mouth. I was like a zombie, mumbling sounds that must have been incoherent to any linguist. I remember she said her name was Kathy. I quickly turned and left. I found more reasons to, quote, run into her, as my mornings filled with excitement of the possibility of seeing Kathy again. I hadn't realized the reason for the farm hiring her was to help break the new batch of horses. When she showed up at the training barn early in June, I was crazy with excitement because now I'd see her a great deal. When I found I would be teamed up with her instead of Sunny, I had mixed emotions. I loved working with the young horses, and Sunny and I did it well. I was excited to be with Kathy, but her abilities as a horseman were unknown to me. That worry was short-lived as we started working together, going through the process of bellying and backing the young horses. We had fun together, and I felt comfortable for the first time with a girl. I decided to ask her out, and we went to Friendly's restaurant for dinner. It was our first date, and underneath the table, we held hands. I was being hooked like a lazy catfish on a warm summer day, but I didn't mind one bit. Sometimes we think we're in control of life, but later find out we were just along for the ride. About a year before Kathy had met me, she was at a party with a boyfriend she'd had since high school. The group decided to break out the Ouija board, dim the lights, light some candles, and ask the board questions to get whatever mysterious answers that were waiting from, quote, beyond. Everyone there assumed that Kathy was going to be with her boyfriend forever, so they asked the board who she was going to marry. It was their test to see if the board really worked and could read the future. The board piece had 4 small legs. On the bottom of each leg was a thick piece of felt, allowing it to effortlessly move on the board's surface. It was big enough to allow 6 people to place their fingertips on top. This allowed the energy of the spirits to travel through the fingertips, causing the piece to move. As it did, the pointer on it would pass over letters, allowing the spirits to spell messages. The stand where people placed their fingers now started to move across the board. The pointer stopped at the first letter, G. It moved again and again, spelling G-E-O-F-F. Most people didn't even know that it was the old English spelling of Geoff with a J and passed it off as a fluke. Even Kathy had not remembered that night until she called a friend to tell her about the date with her new boy she had just met. From that point on, Kathy knew she would be marrying me. She never told me, and I was left on my own devices to figure this out. Thankfully, it didn't take long. Kathy and I finished our work on a horse located in the first stall on the backside of the barn, just past the middle of the barn break. She was sitting on top of the horse, and I was turning her a few times around in the stall. All was going well, and it was time for Kathy to ride the big black filly out of the stall into the shed row. I removed the lead, and she did another turn around me in the stall. As they passed the gate, I stepped forward, opened the gate all the way, and walked out of the stall and around the corner into the middle break. I waited as Kathy made one more revolution before leading the filly out. The horse, however, had other plans. The filly rose on her hind legs and in fully erect posture walked out of the stall like a human, turned left, and remaining on her hind legs, walked down the shed row past the middle break. My mouth became dry as I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster to occur. I could imagine Kathy falling to the earth in a broken heap as the horse ran off. Instead, I only saw Kathy riding perfectly balanced, laughing at the ridiculousness of the filly's behavior. She dug her heels into the horse and shouted, "Get going," which sent the filly back on all four legs, trotting nicely in the direction Kathy wanted to go. I was amazed and relieved, then made up my mind right there that I was going to marry Kathy. In September 1976, after 3 months of knowing her, I proposed. While she didn't say yes, she also didn't say no. She knew her answer already, but I guess she just wanted to be sure I was the right Geoff. Story time. Is my horse pregnant? The looks on their faces were drawn and serious. I was nervous, as it was my first year on the job as a veterinarian. I worked for a rural general practice where I saw mostly cows and small animals. My boss would work on horses, but was glad to hire someone showing interest in them so he could concentrate on the cows of the upstate New York hills where he was born and raised. Daryl and Betsy are husband and wife that enjoyed each other's company and brought an air of perfection to everything they did. They were always clean, and so were their quarter horses and the barn. Neat would be their description I would apply, followed with serious. They were proud of their Swedish roots and reminded me of it often. Today was not my first visit. I had done enough things right on their farm to earn their suspicious trust, but I was far from absolutely proving myself to them. Today, they wanted my opinion of several things, including a pregnancy exam. I started in on the list, and the items were simple and straightforward. "I want you to check if this horse is pregnant," Daryl said in a stern and authoritative voice as we approached the final item on his list. He had been a magistrate in the past and was used to saying things once and getting the correct results immediately. He also proudly owned a Thompson submachine gun, and all I could think of was how he was a lawman from the old whiskey running days and he took no prisoners. Betsy slipped a halter and lead rope on the horse, and I followed her into the stall. My brain was filled with images of how this tall, Abe-looking man with a trim black beard peppered with gray hairs continued to size me up. His questioning eyes challenged me constantly, and he had every right to do this. I was fresh out of vet school, and my fingertips had little experience in pregnancy detection. Fancy technology did not exist. We were just grateful for plastic sleeves, and the word ultrasound was not even on the horizon. Let's not let Betsy off the hook of this scrutiny of me. While her piercing blue Scandinavian eyes, full blonde hair, and tight-fitting jeans sculpted her body and reminded me of pictures I'd seen in magazines in my pre-marriage days, her look was no less stern than Daryl's when it came to their horses. Seriousness settled in as I started to position myself behind the horse, and I applied copious amounts of lubricant to the sleeve on my arm. My young vet mind dove deep into my training. My thoughts did a dry run. Slowly enter one finger, then two, then my whole hand in the horse's rectum. Stand to one side in case the horse decided to kick. Evacuate the manure from the rectum, then relube. Work my way into the rectum slowly and dip my curved fingers down toward the pelvis and hook the uterus. Work my hand both to the left and to the right and feel for uterine tone and any large lumps. At this point in my thinking, my brain stopped. Something wasn't right. I had my sleeve on and the lube was dripping off it, but that was as far as I'd gotten. I turned to the couple and asked a breeding date. It was the fall, and this horse should be anywhere from 3 to 9 months pregnant. Why were they asking me to check this mare now, when the size of the foal would be large and they should have had this mare confirmed pregnant months ago? Daryl's response was annoying. "You tell me, Doc." I lifted the tail and aimed my forefinger toward the anus. I froze. One hole. I stopped and looked up at the two who had twitching corners on their lips. "What the heck?" I exclaimed. Daryl and Betsy started to uncontrollably laugh as they pranced around their quiet as a mouse stallion, saying that they had got their new young vet to do a rectal on their stallion to see if he was pregnant. I protested. I never went in. I did not do a rectal on that stallion for pregnancy. This only fueled their fire, and they told the story to anyone who would listen for the next few years. I went home mad and upset, but I also went home knowing I would be their vet forever, and I was. Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.